I think it's important also to remember that Serbia has opened something like 22 out of 35 chapters. And then two chapters are provisionally closed, and all of that is because the methodology for enlargement has changed during the time when Serbia has been a candidate country. That's not really relevant, so to say, but because Serbia is where Serbia is, and the report that comes out later today will say what it does in terms of the assessment. I think it's important to remember, and looking at the Council conclusions from last year, where the member states expresses where are we in terms of enlargement. So you have the Commission that will do the assessment of whether the certain benchmarks on the reform process of aligning a certain country's regulatory framework and legal framework to the EU's rules and regulations. That's really to a great extent what the Commission report does, and that of course needs to be in place. Then you have the second process, which is the member states' more political assessment, and the member states has all along stressed that there needs to be sufficient progress on what we call fundamentals, which is basically rule of law reforms, and there has to be progress in the normalization process with Kosovo. I think the Council conclusion expresses this in that progress in these two areas determines the speed for progress for Serbia. And where we are on that and how member states perceive that is hard to say right now. I don't know, and I don't want to prejudge where we are in a few weeks in terms of member states' assessment of that. But that's what member states will be looking at. But I think the most important thing is sometimes there is a confusion about, if the Commission assesses that all the preconditions for opening a chapter is in place, then it should be open. That is a more technical part of it, and the other very political part of it is equally important, and it's those two things that has to be in sync for progress actually to move forward. And this is where we're going to see whether there is a desire and the sense that Serbia is where it needs to be in order to open a new cluster. So it's a little too early to say whether there will be member state consensus on that. After today, there is a very intense discussion among member states that starts, and it goes on until the European Council meeting in the second half of December, where all this is being discussed and prepared, etc. So let's not prejudge on that, but remain optimistic that Serbia will be able to move forward. So I think, and then you are mentioning also alignment with the EU's foreign and security policy, where you have a country like Montenegro that's 100% aligned, and I think the latest figures for Serbia is 66-67%. So Serbia is moving forward, and again, it is then up to member states to assess whether that is enough progress to say we are fine with that for now, or whether there is a desire to have more. There is an encouragement for full alignment in the Council conclusions, and there has been progress, but is it enough? It's too early to say. No, I understand that when you've been a candidate, this has been part of the discussion for so long, and there comes a point where you wonder, is this the everlasting process, or is this eventually going to lead to something? And I think I would hope that the people of Serbia actually hears that that enlargement is back on the political agenda in the EU. I very much hope. One of the things we are working on is so all this becomes very technical, but a part of the process is that the EU will re-establish a working group that would start to prepare the treaties for new members. That working group has not existed for years. We are hoping that we can get to a point of establishing that by the end of our presidency, and if it's not established late in December, it might be early in the Cypriot presidency. But we are very hopeful that we can re-establish that working group, because it sends such a strong sign. It's actually because we need to get that work going, because the countries that are getting ready relatively fast, and the treaty preparation process is also a long process, and you need to be sure that that doesn't drag on too much on the other side of the country's preparatory processes. So we need this working group to be established from our side. You know, there's always some back and forth among member states, but we are very hopeful that we would be able to establish that. Back to Serbia, I think all of us have some homework to do. I think the government has a very important role to play in actually talking positively about the EU. The media has a very important role. I'm not asking the media to do you know, campaigns or something, but to be honest, instead of having an anti-EU campaign, possibly just actually presenting more objectively what the EU does in this country and what the EU is about. And then, of course, we as EU member states can do more in presenting what is the EU all about, and how very often we actually, when you sit and talk to people, you can fairly easily establish that we share values, and that the EU is a value-based union, and there is a desire to join that. And yes, there's a lot of painful work that has to be done in order to do the reforms that are required. But these reforms are not done to please the EU. These are reforms that are done because they're good for the Serbian society. And they are driven by that desire to see these reforms in the Serbian society, even as we all know that reforms are very often painful because there's certain things that has to change, and we as human beings are not always going into change with a positive approach. We don't know what is taken away from us, and we know what's taken away, but we don't know what is to come. So there is this whole notion also that, oh, this is going to change our society. Yes, an EU enlargement process is changing the society, not because the EU says so, but because the choice of becoming the government's strategic choice of seeing Serbia as a member of the EU is the choice of saying, yes, these reforms would be good for Serbia to undergo, because that is the Serbia we would like to see in the future. And of course that is so you have the short-term, more painful processes, hopefully with a desire to see the long-term effects of the reforms unfold in a way that brings Serbia as a society to a place that Serbia wants to see its own country to go to. So a lot is about the governments talking about the EU, the media's talking about the EU, us talking about the EU. So I think we have a lot of work to do to talk about what it is, not so much about what it isn't, but a lot about what it is. I believe that there is actually a strong momentum and a strong push for enlargement, a push that we haven't seen for quite a few years. And it was the thing that when our Minister for European Integration was here, more or less actually a year ago to date, was also emphasizing the importance of enlargement from a geopolitical perspective, that the world we live in today is one where Europe needs to be stronger, Europe needs to be more united, and one of the ways of doing that is through the enlargement. It is very much driven by Ukraine, but it's not driven only by Ukraine. So yes, the war in Ukraine has brought home to us how important it is that we stand united, and that those who are candidate countries actually succeed in becoming members, so that we as a union become as strong as possible. And from that perspective, she and we have been very focused also on the Balkans. That is really important that the Balkans becomes a part of the European Union. And if you look at the progress that's being made, the most progress is actually done by countries in the Western Balkans. Albania and Montenegro are the countries that are moving the fastest. So it's a good example of saying that, yes, the momentum on enlargement may come from Ukraine and the whole issue around Ukraine and Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, but it has the effect that there's also a desire to see momentum in other candidate countries when those candidate countries are ready to move forward. So yes, I do believe that there is a strong momentum for enlargement right now, and it's driven by the geopolitical situation and the geopolitical necessity of Europe becoming stronger together. You know, the Danes are very supportive of enlargement. The last Eurobarometer that just came out just a few months ago showed that the Danes are in like around 75% in support of enlargement, whereas the average in the EU is 59%, something like that. So I have a huge support of enlargement in Denmark, and a part of that is very much driven by the recognized geopolitical necessity that people actually see that for Europe to be stronger and for Europe to be in a better place in this geopolitical situation where we see Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, then we are better off being strong together, and that requires enlargement. So if you're done it with, the previous Eurobarometers would have seen the Danes being very hesitant on enlargement. That's not the case anymore. We are very supportive of enlargement, including also for Serbia. So the government has a lot of popular backing for the move on towards enlargement.